Good morning. As you can probably hear, I'm at another waterfall. Today I'm at Burleigh Falls, which is in the town of Burleigh Falls in Ontario. It's about 45 minutes to an hour north of Peterborough, and it's a piece of crown land that's a beautiful cascading waterfall that covers maybe 100 meters or so. It's quite ragged down by the bottom, and I've been here. This is my third time. I've been here this week, and there's been quite a lot of rain, and so the rain has raised the water level up. I don't know, maybe 6 inches, maybe a foot. There are a couple places I was standing previously that are now have somewhat deep water flowing over them. So this location has been challenging for me over the past 3 days to figure out what kind of composition that I want to capture of this waterfall. And I think I've just settled that I need a panorama. I need to be able to capture all of these interesting rocks, all of these interesting trees, and the long waterfall to really do it justice. One small vignette of just a small bit of the waterfall isn't going to tell the whole story here. So I'm going to go start setting up my composition and see what type of things the night's morning light's going to give me. So actually the composition that I might go for first shot is where my vlogging camera was. I really enjoyed, the interesting sort of rock patterns that were right in front of that, the large, powerful waterfall chute that's right in the middle, and then this sort of classically bent, Kawartha kind of Muskokan tree in the background. Now, there's absolutely nothing in the sky, although that may change because, clouds don't always appear right away until just after the sunrise sometimes. So hopefully that's true this time. But either way, I think I can kind of tighten this thing up a little bit and really focus on the foreground interest and get a lot of really interesting things in this one scene. I might even shoot vertically, as that's sort of what the scene is telling me. Anyways, let me try it out. I'm trying desperately to rush to get this composition set up. My watch tells me I've got 8 minutes before sunrise, and I think the horizon's quite low, so I'm going to catch it right away. I better be prepared to capture this light. Let me keep going. I've got this large crack in the rock in the front here, and it's got two cracks, one leading off into the left, one leading off into the right. In my midground, I've got this waterfall, and I haven't really figured out how long I'm going to need to photograph that for to get a very sort of smooth, interesting looking scene. And then I've got this tree that I really like in the top here. There's really nothing going on in the sky. I don't think there's going to be any cloud. However, the light should start hitting this area of trees pretty soon, as well as maybe some of the rocks, as well as maybe, some other things. So you probably can't see it, but off into the distance there's a little boathouse. And a plane flying through my scene, that's fine. Either way, as this color begins to come out a little bit more, I'm hoping it'll catch on some of these rocks, catch in some of the trees, and this composition will be really nice. This is not at all what I intended to shoot, and I feel like I've stood in this spot before, but without seeing it with the eyes of what the morning light is going to bring me, I overlooked it. It wasn't a scene. And I think that's the truth of landscape photography, right? You're always sort of photographing the sun reflecting off of something, and that's what you're trying to capture. And so you need to get the best light you can. You need to get the best position of the sun in order for it to look all right. I'm gonna set this thing up and take a couple test shots, possibly figure out, how long I'm gonna need to expose in order to get that water looking nice, and I'm gonna keep going. I think I might pre-crop this to a 4x3, tighten the scene up vertically, just to know exactly what I'm going to be cutting out when I'll need to crop it later. Some really interesting things that started to show up as the light has gotten a little bit brighter. I've noticed that there's this sort of, stream, almost part of the waterfall that goes in this direction. And I've started to notice a couple of distracting elements in the foreground, which I'm just going to go and pick up. There's a little leaf that I'm going to go pick up, which I don't think is going to add to the scene. And I'm going to kind of move my camera just a little bit to cut out some things that I really don't want. I'm going to try changing my camera settings a little bit so that what I get is smooth water. And the way that I'm going to be doing that is looking at the shutter speed. So I've got a couple of tools I can use to affect that here, but what I'm looking for is smooth, interesting water that has some of these different parts of the whitewater turned into, running lines. And hopefully what they'll do is sort of lead the viewer's eye in this direction out to where the sun is. My hope for this image is that people sort of look at this crack, look at the interesting detail here, and follow, one of these cracks up the left side through the waterfall, through this tree, and then kind of get caught in the sky and maybe come back and then look at it again and take a look at this crack off to this side, and then look at the interesting detail of the water kind of pooling on top of these rocks. And hopefully the light is very engaging, and so the sky will be very bright. People's eyes are always drawn to the brightest part of the sky, and so that'll be in this direction, which is exactly where the water is flowing. Oh, I think this zebra coming on here means that the sun just rose and the sky brightened up. I'm going to darken that down a little bit to get rid of the zebra display and see what I can get with. Looks like 1/14 of a second, call it 1/3 of a second here. A 1/3 of a second looks pretty good. I've got a couple of different lines coming in from the left side here. You can see some definition in the water. You can see some definition in the rocks over here, but you can tell that it's really quite a ragged falls, and it leads off into the distance. I might not be able to get that shutter speed once I get some light on this scene. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do about that. I do have some ND filters with me. Perhaps that'll help, but I think, 1/3 of a second, maybe 1/2 of a second is going to be the right timing for me. So I've decided to put on a neutral density filter. This is an ND8. So watch what that's done. Now all of a sudden I've got 0.8 seconds, and if I take my ISO back up to 100, I get 0.4 seconds, which is kind of near my 0.5 seconds. Yeah, f13, 0.5 seconds. So I'm going to try shooting this again and seeing what kind of, what sort of definition I get in the water, and we'll take a look at what that does ultimately. Oh yeah, I've got a little bit more smoothness in this water. That's kind of what I am hoping for. I like the clear, stark contrast between the smoothness in the water and the shape of the trees and the harshness of the rocks that are sort of very strong element in this foreground. I think I'm realizing that I've got this little bit of island off to the side here. Might move my camera a little bit just to cut that out, and I can finally see the sun coming up, which I think is going to be just outside of my frame. That's going to be good because it's not going to put too much light right into my sensor. I really wish there were some interesting clouds here. The sky is really rather quite boring, but there's a lot to focus on in this scene, so I still like it quite a lot. No complaints, no complaints. So once again, actually, I've set my vlogging gear up kind of where a really, really nice composition is. I'm going to change positions very quickly so that I can capture a little bit more that scene that you just saw, because I really like it. I thought it was really interesting. Now, the camera on the phone is a little bit wider. I think it's a 13 or 14 millimeter equivalent. And, I've got a 16 mil, so I'm not going to be able to capture the entire scene, but I really like the sun blasting in and, adding a bunch of light to these different pieces. That light is fading, so I'm going to start working fast. So really, I'm keeping this same crack that I had in the foreground in my vertical composition, but I've got now two things going on. So I've got the sun here, and I've got this tree over here. And now this crack, while it's a little bit off to the right side of my frame, it has this wonderful leading line of this crack that's right here that leads into, a wet piece of sort of jagged rock that also continues the scene out to this little island, and then where the sun is just popping overhead of that. And then off to the left of the scene, I've still got this water coming in, creating nice, smooth, interesting lines from the left side, but now the crack is pointing towards the falls right here, and then ultimately to the tree, and ultimately to this little piece of water over here, which should catch a little bit of interest. The sky, still nothing going on, but I'm capturing the scene as it is. So when I'm shooting this, I'm taking myself down to -2, which is 6 full stops of light. And I've got a neutral density filter on there, so that's giving me 1/13 of a second at f14, ISO 100. But 2 stops of light is what I need in order to get just the sun in the zebra. So that'll be blown out, but the sun doesn't have really any definition to begin with, but I don't want anything else in the scene to be blown out, so I've got to take that down. Luckily, my Sony a7 IV has quite a lot of dynamic range, and so I can bring a lot of the colors out of these rocks and other elements that are there, even though I'm shooting so dark. That won't be a problem, I don't think. I might just end up bracketing here. What I'm going to be doing here is I'm going to take a slightly lighter frame where the sky is definitely blown out, but nothing in the foreground here is blown out. The reason why I'm doing that is because it'll allow me to capture this with a little more definition. I've got all this dynamic range, but I won't need to lift these colors so high up that they become noisy. So I'm going to take this shot. Hopefully it'll help me focus a little bit, and then I'll do the water probably at a different exposure, and then the sky finally at an entirely different exposure than that. Actually, I quite like the water at that exposure, so I'm just going to focus it, and that should be it. I'm going to focus on this area over here, because this actually has some contrast, and is about at the same level plane as the waterfall over there. So now I'm going to take this down to -2 in my exposure compensation so that I can capture this background without blowing out the highlights of the sun or anything that's around the sun. I'm going to focus on this tree over here, mostly because I like to look at it. Actually, now I'm going to go back to my original vertical composition. The light is getting really nice, and I think I can tighten this scene down just a little bit and make it really quite powerful. So I'm going to walk you through what I'm doing here again. The composition that I've got here is really not dissimilar to the one that I just shot, except that I'm excluding the sun in favor of everything that the sun is lighting up. So as that sun rises, I get more and more color on the rocks, I get more and more light and color in the waterfall, and I get a little bit of color in the trees there. They all tell a story of the sun rising that you can't really see, but the light is just so wonderful. So I want to be able to capture this and not have to deal with the sun blasting into my camera as much. I still probably am. I might have to shield the camera off to the side here to avoid getting any kind of glaring effects right on the lens, but all in all, it's basically the same composition. I'm moving my tripod just a little bit to get balance in this scene. The reason why I want to be able to move is because I want to create somewhat of a V with these cracks, and I really don't want, this one crack where I had it before was leading right to the edge of the frame, and I want a little bit of space in between there, so the viewer's eye doesn't lead off, as they're looking at this, off and something into the distance. I wanted to kind of lead back into my frame, and again, my main focal point here is definitely this tree area with the waterfall below it, but the foreground element really helps with that. I'll probably shoot 3 different frames of this, and I'll be bracketing my exposure the entire time, so I don't care about the zebra display at this particular time, as long as the area, the area that I'm actually shooting for doesn't have any blown out highlights. I should be okay. Actually, my next part is going to be this waterfall, which I'm not going to shoot by focusing on the waterfall. I'm going to focus on this point over here. It's at about the same plane visually as the waterfall, but the waterfall is going to get blurred out by the fact that my shutter speed is slowed down. So that doesn't really matter. But I really do want that rock in focus. That's going to be something that you can actually see. I've made sure to leave space between a few elements. And the first is between this rock here and the waterfall. I don't want this rock overlapping with something that's going to be visually interesting, as it will create a distraction. The frame that I've taken, this doesn't interact with the water at all. It's just sort of right there, leaves a little bit of gap, then the water, then a little bit of gap, then the next part of the waterfall, and then there's some visual, separation between this and finally the trees at the top. I've made sure to leave space on the right side and on the left side of these cracks so that I'm not pointing the viewer's eye off of the frame, and I am leaving a little bit of space on these side of the trees. Now, this island here, this is a bit of a distracting element. I'm probably just gonna, go over that with a brush in Photoshop and get rid of that because it's not really interesting. It just has one little small tree on it, and I haven't included it in my frame. I don't think I need to. Well, this is a really good example of showing up to a location shoot with a preconceived notion of what I wanted. Originally, I had said that I thought I wanted a panorama to be able to capture the entire scene. And while I've gotten a nice wide shot, I didn't get a panorama. And actually, probably the shot I'm going to like the most is the vertical composition. Nice and sort of tight, small vignette, this one small scene of all the things that are happening. But I don't think you need to be able to go incredibly wide to capture a full scene, because really what you're capturing is the essence. You're capturing the nature of what's happening at this location. So I've got an interesting, an interesting subject here. I've got interesting light, and the rest of it doesn't really matter. I don't need to be able to get every single thing in my frame in order to make something powerful that really conveys the story of this location. There are some interesting things happening with the light, but there's really no cloud in the sky whatsoever, and so the light's just getting very bright and white. That means it's time to start packing up and heading home. Either way, bye for now.